never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Find another.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Let me start out today's video by saying Happy New Year to everybody. And how long do you personally say that to other people? And how long does it take for you to get irritated and annoyed when somebody else says it? I know me personally in the past, I've had experiences where I run to the local retail store or local hardware store, local grocery store to buy something. And I'll see somebody in there that's also doing some shopping, and I haven't seen them in 2 or 3 months. And they walk up to you and say, Happy New Year. It's like January the 20th. And I don't say it out loud, but to myself, I'm thinking, it's no longer the new year. To me, after about January the 5th, you should stop saying it. That's just another one of those weird things that just bothers me. I think after January the 5th, you should stop saying Happy New Year. But on to today's video where we're going to talk some college football. Talk about all the bowl games that happened this past week. Now, of course, we've got a few bowl games coming up tomorrow. All the bowl games that are usually on New Year's Day are going to be tomorrow. And then we have the national championship game next Monday. So we're not quite done with college football, but for the most part, we're done. But there was some great bowl games this past week. I'm not going to elaborate on every single one of them because it would take a long time, but I will elaborate on some of the games. But in the Quick Lane Bowl, New Mexico State defeated Bowling Green by the score of 24-19. In the Camellia Bowl, Buffalo defeated Georgia Southern 23-21. The First Responder Bowl, Memphis beat Utah State 38-10. And before I go any further while I'm thinking about it, did anybody else see the article that came out last week? I would say probably, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday. I forget the guy's name. I think it's Adam something or Austin. Anyway, it started with an A. And he's 29 years old, and he plays for either a Division II or Division III school. Well, he's announced he's transferring to play somewhere else. So he's going to be 30 years old still playing college football. And that's one of the reasons why people that hate the portal hate the portal. You should not be 30 years old still playing college football. Now, I understand there are conditions where players transfer, and when those conditions occur, I'm okay with it. Like, some players only go to a team because of the head coach. Well, if that's your reason to go to that school, and after your freshman year, sophomore year, whatever it is, that coach either gets fired or leaves or retires, and then you transfer, I'm okay with that because you went there for the head coach. He's no longer there. I'm good with that. You didn't go there because you love that program. You went there for the coach. I understand that. And then some players transfer because they go to a school and they get injured, and then when they're cleared to return, they lose their starting spot. So they didn't do anything to warrant losing their job except getting hurt. But since they got hurt, they lost their job. So, of course, their feelings going to get hurt. They're going to transfer. I get that. So, for reasons like that, if you transfer, I understand it one time. But you shouldn't be allowed to transfer 4 or 5 times. And you can't really say, hey, if you transfer, you're going to sit out a year. Because then, in those situations where a player transfers 4 or 5 times, if he plays somewhere a year, transfers, sits out a year, goes somewhere else, plays a year, transfers, sits out a year, by the time he plays 5 years and transfers 4 times, he's playing college football 9 years, and that's ridiculous. So that shouldn't be allowed to happen. But something has to change. Kids shouldn't be 30 years old playing college football. The Guaranteed Rate Bowl saw Wisconsin beat Oklahoma State by the score of 24-17. The Birmingham Bowl saw East Carolina win the Battle of the Carolinas. They defeated Coastal Carolina 53-29. The Military Bowl, Duke beat Central Florida 30-17. And I don't know how Duke's head coach Mike Elko cannot win National Coach of the Year. You're talking about a team that was absolutely dreadful in 2021. And then they hire Mike Elko, and I think they were only picked to win 4 or 5 games this year, and they won 9 games. So they totally overachieved. If Mike Elko doesn't win National Coach of the Year, they might as well just get rid of that award. The Liberty Bowl saw Arkansas win because of an epic collapse. Arkansas wins the game 55-53. And if you watch that game, you know why I always say don't bet. And you know why I don't bet and why I encourage other folks to not bet. Because Arkansas was picked to win the game by 3 points. So they won by 2, which is bad enough that you already lost the bet by 1 point. But what makes it even worse is Arkansas was up 38-20 going to the fourth quarter. They were up 38-23 with 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and let Kansas tie the score 38-38. And then Arkansas wins in triple overtime by the score of 55-53. And I know I mentioned a couple days ago that the game had a great finish, and it did, but it wasn't a great game until the very end. Arkansas dominated that game for the first 57 minutes, and the last 3 minutes of the game, Arkansas just absolutely fell apart. They were completely, totally outcoached, but luckily for them, they had a little bit better talent than Kansas does. So in the end, talent won, but Sam Pittman got outcoached big time. The Holiday Bowl was a phenomenal game, start to finish. Oregon wins the game by the score of 28-27. Now, when the game started, Oregon had no problem moving the football. Their first 3 drives, they had 2 touchdowns. And then the other possession, I believe, either was a turnover on downs or a missed field goal, one of the two. So their first 3 drives, they moved right down the field. And then their next 5 or 6 drives, they did absolutely nothing. And they were down 27-14. And then their last 2 drives was touchdown. They win the game 28-27. And what was funny about that was Oregon scored with less than a minute to go, and Bo Nix threw the touchdown pass, and I have never trusted Bo Nix. So when Bo Nix dropped back to throw the pass, I thought he's going to throw a pick. But nope, it was a touchdown. Oregon won the game. Great football game. That's what bowl season is all about. And then the Texas Bowl, we saw an upset because I think everybody thought Ole Miss would win that game. They didn't. They got beat pretty handily. Texas Tech beats them by the score of 42-25. And then the Pinstripe Bowl saw Minnesota defeat Syracuse by the score of 28-20. Minnesota's got a quarterback named Ethan Kaliakmanis, and they are much, much better with him under center than they are with Tanner Morgan. And I know that Kaliakmanis is hard to say, but he fits their offense a lot better than Tanner Morgan does. Tanner Morgan seems to have regressed since he's been at Minnesota. And the Cheez-It Bowl saw Florida State defeat Oklahoma by the score of 35-32. Now, for the most part, most of the bowl games have been evenly matched as far as teams go record-wise. You'll see like Arkansas was 6-6. Kansas was 6-6. I think Oregon and North Carolina both had 9 wins. The Tar Heels had played one more game because of the conference championship, but both teams won 9 games. Texas Tech won 7. Ole Miss won 8. When Wake Forest played Missouri, Wake won 7. Missouri won 6. So for the most part, most of the bowl games were 2 teams that either had identical records or maybe a half game apart, 1 game apart. But the Cheez-It Bowl was different because you look at Florida State, they won 9 games, and Oklahoma won 6. So on paper, that was the one that looked like it wasn't a fair matchup. But Florida State played very, very sloppy, and Oklahoma came out playing really, really good. But in the end, talent won, and Florida State wins the game. And Jordan Travis is back next year, so Florida State might be a pretty doggone good football team next year. The Alamo Bowl saw Washington defeat Texas by the score of 27-20. And then for all the people out there that's about my age, maybe a little older, the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl on Friday reminded me of Jefferson Pilot Sports. And anybody that lives in the South, maybe up north, but definitely down south, knows all about Jefferson Pilot. When I first started watching college football in the mid-90s, before cable and satellite and all that took over, Jefferson Pilot was the place to be on Saturdays if you wanted to watch an ACC game. All they carried was ACC games. And every game they carried was at noon. Mike Hogwood was the sideline reporter, and you had Steve Martin doing play-by-play, and former Redskin player Richard Doc Walker was the analyst. The reason why I bring that up is because Jefferson Pilot usually carried the middle of the pack ACC teams, or the bottom of the barrel teams sometimes. But 3:30 was the good teams, and primetime was the great teams. So usually, middle of the pack teams played at noon on Jefferson Pilot. Well, Friday, you had the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl with Maryland, who used to be in the ACC, and NC State. And of course, in the regular season, Maryland won 7 games, NC State won 8 games, and the game started at noon. So I was like, man, this game feels just like Jefferson Pilot in 1996 with Steve Martin and Doc Walker. But that's just me, but I'm one of those nostalgia type people. So anytime something reminds me of back when I was young, I always think about it, harp on it for a while. And then also on Friday, we had the Sun Bowl. And the one thing about the Sun Bowl was they got lucky because the Sun Bowl is sponsored by Tony the Tiger. So when you have Tony the Tiger, you have to be great. And luckily for the Sun Bowl, the game was great. Pittsburgh wins in the very, very end by the final score of 37-35. And Pittsburgh starting quarterback during the regular season, Kedon Slovis, announced he was transferring to BYU. So their backup quarterback had to play in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl on Friday. And then we had the Gator Bowl, which saw Notre Dame defeat South Carolina by the score of 45-38. Now, Notre Dame came out in this game sloppy, and they were way behind at one point. But in the end, they come back to win the game. And then we had the bowl game that did not come on TV, aired on Barstool. That was the Barstool Arizona Bowl, where Ohio defeated Wyoming by the score of 30-27. And then we had the Orange Bowl, which of course was the Orange Bowl this year because you had Orange Tennessee and Orange Clemson. Tennessee wins the game 31-14. Of course, I had wrestling on Friday night, so I went back and watched the game yesterday morning. And honestly, I wasn't very surprised. I did think it would be a lot more competitive than that. And part of me thought Clemson would win the game. Part of me didn't. All I can say is, for 2 years here on the channel, I've been telling anybody and everybody that would listen that Clemson's problems on offense were not DJ. Their offensive line is a hot pile of doo-doo. They have no downfield threat with the wide receivers at all. They have no consistent wide receiver. Every time one catches 3-4 passes, they'll drop the next one. None of the receivers block downfield. I've said that for 2 years, but every single person thought every single issue Clemson had was because of DJ. And I've said the whole time it was not DJ. Well, Friday, guess what? DJ didn't play, and the offensive line was a hot pile of doo-doo. And then all day long yesterday, all I heard was, our offensive line sucks. Yeah, I've been saying that. The offensive line sucked when DJ was there, but nobody wanted to see it. The offensive line is a hot pile of doo-doo, and if they don't get that fixed, it's going to be the same situation next year. They moved the ball like crazy, but they couldn't score. And that's why I say sometimes stats are fun to look at because they catch you off guard. Look at that game. Clemson had almost 500 yards of offense, and Tennessee had like 360. But Tennessee wins the game by 17 points, and that's what matters. So hopefully now everybody will understand that when I said Clemson's problems were not DJ, I was not trying to defend DJ. I was just calling it like I see it. The offensive line is an absolute joke. It's been an absolute joke now for about 5 years. Now, of course, this year they had a first-year offensive line coach, so maybe it'll get better, but it's been going off the rails for a good 5 years. And then we had the Sugar Bowl yesterday. Alabama defeats Kansas State by the score of 45-20. And then we had our first shutout of the bowl season, the Music City Bowl. Iowa defeats Kentucky by the score of 21-0. Now, Iowa had 2 pick sixes in that game. So, Iowa's offense scored 1 touchdown, and Kentucky didn't score anything. So, it was actually 7-0 as far as offense goes. So, Iowa's defense puts up more than their offense does. But Kentucky, they better be glad that Devin Leary is transferring there, because after Will Levis announced he was entering the draft, they went with a quarterback named Destin Wade, who was next in line at their quarterback position. And he looked absolutely awful. So if they didn't have Devin Leary coming in, they would be in trouble going into next season, because their third-string quarterback, who came in late in the game because the game was over with, his name is Deuce Hogan. No kin to Hulk Hogan. His name is Deuce Hogan, and he transferred to Kentucky from Iowa because he couldn't play there because he totally sucks. So Kentucky definitely should be glad that Devin Leary's coming there. But from a Devin Leary perspective, I don't understand that move whatsoever. You go from a middle-of-the-pack ACC team to a middle-of-the-pack SEC team. You leave NC State, who runs a slow, methodical, spread offense that's based on the running game to go to Kentucky, who runs a slow, methodical spread offense that's based on the running game. So basically, you transferred from one school to go to the next school that runs the same type of offense. There is no difference in the NC State offense and the Kentucky offense. NC State might throw the ball 4 or 5 more times a game, but that's it. So, from a Leary perspective, I don't understand this move at all. As good as he is, he could have just about gone to any school that had a quarterback opening and won the starting job. So, why you pick Kentucky? I don't know. Your numbers at Kentucky are going to be the same as your numbers at NC State. I don't get that. And then, of course, we had our 2 first-round playoff games yesterday. And I mentioned, I believe in Friday's video, that this was the first time in a long time that I personally thought we had the 4 best teams, the 4 deserving teams. And maybe that meant we were actually going to get good playoff games this year, because every other year in the first round, there's always at least one blowout game. Well, this year, we didn't get that. We had 2 competitive, great football games. In the Fiesta Bowl, TCU actually upset Michigan by the score of 51-45. Now, Michigan threw 2 pick sixes, and that was the difference in the game. But if you didn't watch the game, you might think, boy, there was no defense in that game, but almost half the points were scored in the third quarter. The total combined points in the game was 96 points. 44 were scored in the third quarter. It was TCU 21, Michigan 6 at halftime. But in quarter number 3, Michigan scored 24 and TCU scored 20. So going to the fourth quarter, it was TCU 31, Michigan 30. So almost half the points were scored in the third quarter, but it was a good game. But no doubt those 2 pick sixes were the difference. But Michigan just had too many chances and blowed them. Not only did they throw 2 pick sixes, but they had the ball 4th and goal on about the 2.5-yard line on, I believe, their very first possession, and they chose to go for it, didn't get it. And then another drive, they had the ball 1st and goal inside the 1-yard line and fumbled into the end zone. And in a playoff game against a good team, you have to take advantage of those chances, and they just didn't do it. Now, of course, the fumble, it happens. You hate to see it, but it happens. But honestly, I was surprised when they went for it on that 4th and goal on about the 2.5-yard line. I get it if it's, almost halftime and TCU's not going to drive the field. I get it if it's fourth quarter and you're trailing. But first drive of the game, that's an easy 3 points. So I was surprised that Harbaugh decided to go for it. And then in the Peach Bowl, we had Georgia defeat Ohio State by 1 point, 42-41. Ohio State missed a 50-yard field goal, I think, with 3 seconds to go in the game. And honestly, this was a great game. And if you watch that game, you see why now. I've said since about week number 2 that the 2 best teams in the country were Ohio State and Georgia. And if they didn't play in the first round, they'd play for the national championship. But, of course, they played in the first round. By far, the 2 best teams in the country. Great football game. But, honestly, I was surprised there at the end when Georgia took the lead 42-41, and Ohio State got the ball back, and their kicker had just made a 48-yard field goal, and it barely cleared the bottom goalpost. So from 49.5, he'd have probably missed it. But 48, it was good. But C.J. Stroud broke a long run and got all the way down to Georgia's 30-yard line. And Ohio State still had timeouts left. So I thought, me personally, since it's legal for your offensive linemen and running backs to push the quarterback. I thought they were going to snap the ball from 30-yard line and have C.J. Stroud run up the middle and let the line push him and get 2 or 3 yards, call timeout, do the same thing again on second down and get 2 or 3 yards, and then on third down, just line up and get right in the middle of the field and kick a field goal. Because from 30-yard line, you're talking about a 47-yarder. And if you had just cleared the bottom goalpost from 48, you don't want to try from pretty much the same distance all over again. But on first down, they throw the ball. On second down, they try to run it and lose a yard. And on third down, they throw the ball. So that was a baffling set of downs, in my personal opinion. But I've always questioned Ryan Day's play calling. And if you follow the channel, you know that back around week 1 or 2, I said that Ohio State had the best offense in the country, and they could score 45, 50 points a game easily. And when the season started, that was the case up until about week number 7, and for whatever reason, their offense just got progressively worse after that. But I guess having the month off from the end of the season to the bowl game, they got their offense clicking again because they looked really, really good on offense, but their defense is still absolutely terrible. But it's amazing that Ohio State has that much talent and they can't score more than they do. But the funny thing about the game last night was they have not been able to run the ball all year long. And then, of course, their running back, Travion Henderson, was out. So I didn't think they were going to be able to run the ball at all. But I said back around, it might have been the Michigan game, going into that game, that if C.J. Stroud would run the ball, he could run, he just wouldn't. Well, last night he did. He was very successful doing it. But what a great, great game it was. And it was funny because when Ohio State went up 41-35, I said, Georgia's going to drive down the field, and they going to score. And they did. Any thoughts on any of the games, please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. When does a duck wake up? At the quack of dawn. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.